Dear students, I am Siddhartha Shankar, an assistant professor in English, Government Horoganga College, Munshiganj. Hopefully you are doing well. Today I am addressing to the students of Honors Part 1 under National University. You have one course entitled Introduction to Poetry, and from that course I am going to discuss on a poem. And of course about the poet, and the poet is Percy Shelley, and the poem entitled Ode to the West Wind. So today basically I will have discussion on the poet, we will know about the poet, and we will have some discussion or have some idea about the poem. And later in the later classes we will go through the text of the poet. We will go through the text and we will elaborately discuss about the poet and the poem. Now Percy Shelley or P.B. Shelley, he was born on August 4, 1792, and he died on July 8, 1822, and he was survived on the earth only for 29 years. Therefore he was a very, in comparison to the human lifespan, he was a short-lived poet. And Keats was also in the classroom atmosphere. We had a discussion on John Keats to Autumn. He was also a very short-lived poet. But unlike Keats, P.B. Shelley, he had a very good family reputation, and he was born in a rather aristocratic family. And there was political involvement of his father, and it was a affluent family, and Shelley was the eldest son of the family. As you see that he was born on 1792 and died in 1822. Therefore he belonged to Romantic era, that is the age in which he belonged was Romantic age. That means he was a romantic poet. Now the question is, what are the characteristics of romantic poetry, or what is romanticism? One single thing we have to remember, that is romantic poets basically depends on their imagination. That imagination is the basic tone of romantic poetry, and therefore the personal thought of the poet is reflected in romantic poetry, and we get the philosophy of the poet in the poems of romantic era, in the poets of romantic era. Therefore here we find that John Keats is basically a romantic poet. Romantic age started on 1798 and it continued up to 1832. So some of the major poets of romantic age are Wordsworth, Keats, Byron, Shelley, Coleridge, and Blake was also a romantic poet. And you see the romantic poets basically they had a revelation of the set rules of writing poetry. That means they didn't follow any classical structure of writing. Therefore they have freedom in their attitude, and they gave importance on imagination and of course on personal feelings. And Ode to the West Wind is of course written based on this tradition. So before going to discuss the uh, poem, let's know what is an ode, because the title of the poem is Ode to the West Wind. So what is ode? Ode is basically a form of lyric poetry. So you mind it is a form of lyric poetry, and it of course expresses the emotion, and it usually addressed to someone or something, That means it expresses personal emotion or personal feelings of the poet. Therefore, you see, the personal philosophy, that is subjectivity, is there even in the ode, and it represents the poet's thought. Therefore, it is in it ode also, you see, the romantic characteristics is there in writing ode. And a personal thought about that mm, uh, any person or any thing or any object. Therefore, how can we describe an ode? Ode is a form of lyric poetry expressing emotion, and it's usually addressed to someone or something, so, and it represents the poet's thoughts on that person or thing. Now, one thing you have seen here, that you have noted, I think, that ode is a form of lyric poetry. So what is lyric poetry? The term lyric is associated with song, because whenever we listen to, or we listen to any song, the term lyric comes to our mind. But in writing poetry, it is different somehow, because in the writing of poetry also, you see, here you will find that highly musical verse is used in a lyric poet, and it conveys, of course, that is powerful feelings of the poet. And the poet and you see that the poem is has rhythm. This type of poem has a meter, and some of the literary devices are also used in writing lyric poems. So in a lyric poem is basically a musical verse that is composed using rhythm, meter, rhyme, etc. And you see, this ode to the west wind is an ode, of course, and it is at the same time a lyric poem. And you see, it is written by, it is composed by Percy Bysshe Shelley, P.B. Shelley. So something you see that Percy Bysshe Shelley was basically somehow eccentric in character, or there was some madness in him. He started education in Oxford, but he didn't take part in many classes of during his academic period. It is surprising that somewhere it is told that he only participated in only one class during his time of education or academic career. So you see, somehow he was rather a medley fellow, or he had some different characteristics that is not similar to other students. And at the same time, you see, Percy Bysshe Shelley, he had a very disturbed family life, or turbulent family life. You see, in his short span of life, he married twice. He got 2 wives in his short span of life, and first one was his first wife was Harriet Westbrook. He married Harriet Westbrook on in 1811, and later his wife got suicide. He wife got suicide because the family this was not a well matched conjugal life, and the first wife committed suicide on 1816, and on the same year he again married Mary Shelley, another woman, and it continued up to his death, the affair. So his death was also surrounded with some mystery. You know that he died in a boat accident. He went on a pleasure trip with his friends in the sea, but unfortunately the boat sank and he died. So therefore this is also a misfortune for him. Another thing is that he was always moved by the that political condition of then Europe, and at that time, immediate after the French Revolution, the air of democracy was everywhere, but the autocratic leaders of the political parties, they didn't allow the democratic right of the people. Therefore he felt sorry for the people, and his mind was moved by this misfortune of the people. And at the same time, his family life was not excellent. His family life was very much it was full of disturbance. And his first his first issue, a daughter, a son, he died in 1818, and the second issue, another daughter, she died on 1819, and so this is in this condition his mental perspective, you can understand, it was very 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 much sorrowful and miserable. Therefore in his personal feelings has been that is reflected in this poem, Ode to the West Wind, and you can understand that the condition of his mind at that time. The political condition was not good, the social condition, the people of the society was very much unfortunate. They hadn't their political right or democratic right, and at the same time in his family, you see, he got his first wife committed suicide, and when he married for the second time, he lost two of his issues. Therefore his mental condition was not very good, you can guess, and his mentality or the and has been reflected here in this poem. And you see, the poet is called had a revolutionary zeal in him. That means he always revolted against this social injustice, and he wanted to get the rescue, how to get rid of this social condition. He was always thoughtful about that, and this type of thought has been reflected here in this poem, Ode to the West Wind. So therefore Ode to the West Wind, here the west wind is considered to be that force that can bring happiness to mankind. So this is a west wind, you see, this is a natural object, and as you know that the romantic poets usually define the nature according to their own way. As you have read Wordsworth, in Wordsworth you have find that Wordsworth sees God in natural objects, that is called pantheism. So Wordsworth has one type of view towards nature, and you see Coleridge, he wrote supernatural poems like the rhyme of the ancient mariner, and that is he found supernatural elements in nature. And you see, our poet, the poet whom we are discussing, that is Percy Bysshe Shelley, he also considered nature having some force with it, having some quality in it that can have a revolution in the society. Therefore, his attitude towards nature is unique, and it is different from the other romantics of his contemporary period. Therefore, our poet John Keats is also a lover of nature, and he sees a power or some strongness in the or some strength in nature. And here west wind is a force. Here in this poem, our Shelley, he described west wind as a force that can bring about happiness, that can blow out the injustice from the society. And this is the here we will find how he treats nature. So he has a love for nature, and this is also a characteristics of romantic poets. You see that Percy Bysshe Shelley, he wrote this poem about west wind, and you see, immediate after the summer, the autumn come, and during the autumn, the west wind comes, or west wind blows with a vigor and energy, and it is considered to be a very destructive force, because it can destroy the natural objects, because it has a force in it. It blows with strength. And you know, in the spring also west wind blows, but in the spring it is calm and mild. And you know, spring is a very popular season, and it is called the king of all seasons. That means it is a very pleasant season, and in this season the west wind blows, but it is very mild and pleasant. And in this poem we will find these two type of west wind, that is one is destroyer that blows in autumn, the other is the preserver when vegetation comes out, or vegetation, or the we will find the new birth during the spring. So here the poet has described west wind as both destroyer and at the same time an agent of vegetation or regeneration. And so here we will find that the poet wants to, here at the beginning we will find that the west wind has been personified. That means it acts like a person, a mighty person that can destroy everything. It is wild, and it has a lot of strength. It is mighty, it is full of energy. And you see, here in this poem you see the wind is it is very much forceful. Therefore the poet seeks force or strength from this wind, so that the poet himself will be very much powerful, and he will able to contribute to the society to bring about reformation. That means he wants to gather force or power from the west wind, and using that power he wants to reform the society. So here west wind is considered to be an agent who can give force to him, to the poet. Again he requires the west wind to spread his thoughts over the universe with his mighty power, with the mighty power of the wind, and therefore uh, his thoughts or the philosophy will spread throughout the world, and the people will get benefited from it. There will have the people will have democratic rights, and they will able to live peacefully in the society. And this is his want basically. And you see, this poet was written in the time of autumn. And at that time, the mind of the poet was very much unrest because of his loss in the family. He lost his son, he lost one of his daughters. Therefore, in the autumn, and again, you see, there was another event, that is in England in 1819. There was in a place named St. Peter's Field, and on 16th August 1819, a peaceful rally of 16,000 pro-democracy reformer was attacked by the armed cavalry, and you see it results in death of 15 people, and more than 600 people were injured. The people demonstrated, or they brought out the procession in support of democracy, but they were illegally attacked by the ruling party. And therefore, you see, this incident also had a great mark or on the mind of the poet, and therefore he was very much depressed. And from this depression, this poem, the depression, we can say that this is the outcome. The outcome of the poem is basically from that depression, and therefore here we will find both a pessimistic attitude of the poet, and at the same time we will find his optimism, where he has the hope. That means he will have the power, or he will gain the power from the west wind to reform the society. In your practical life, you see, whenever we see injustice in the society, what do we think? Think yourself as a person who faces a lot of injustice. Like, you see, at the present time, you see that we are in COVID-19 pandemic. We are facing COVID-19 pandemic, and during this time, we of course we can think for, or we can think for very much very good health service. But you see, the people like Arif, or people like Sabrina, or some other fellows, Shahid, you see, what are they doing? They are using the condition, they are using the this bad time to gain property, to gain wealth. If you were in the position of something, or in the position of doing something, what would you do? You think, I think that you will have that attempt to punish them. So this is a type of romantic thought, because we are not in the position of doing anything. We are very common people, common fellow, but we always think that if I gathered that power, if I had that power, I would do something, I would punish these misdoers. So therefore, this is the thought in our mind, but very difficult to materialize. But we don't have a strength in us. And similarly, the poet, our Shelley, he was very much, he was a poet. He didn't have that power to reform the society in a day. Therefore, he seeks power from another agent, that is the west wind. And the west wind, from the west wind, he wants to gather power so that he can reform the society according to his wish. Therefore, this is a type of romantic thought, and this is reflected in this poem. So, I think from today's discussion you have understood about the poet and the background of the poem, and in my next class I am going to discuss on the text, and we will elaborately read out and we will elaborately describe what is there in the text. So hopefully I think this class will be benefited for you, and hopefully we will meet again in another class. Till then, you stay fine. Thanks for watching.